another episode of Unboxing Fulfillment, the modern B2C fulfillment podcast, where we discuss common fulfillment operations challenges and how to fix them. I'm Harry Drajpuch, CEO of Amware Fulfillment, and I'm your host today. And Amware Fulfillment is what we do, scalable fulfillment every day. Our guest today is Charles Lunden, the VP of Operations and E-commerce at 32 Degrees, a clothing retailer that offers everyday items suitable for any wardrobe and any wallet. Charles is responsible for all aspects of marketing, operations, customer service, including fulfillment to consumers and wholesale channels. Full disclosure, 32 Degrees is a customer of Amware Fulfillment. Charles, welcome.
Thank you, Harry. Good to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you and really excited. But before we get started, maybe you can just give our listeners a short summary of your career and how you ended up in your current role.
So I've been with 32 Degrees for about the last 10 years. My entire career, I've worked in apparel wholesale. I started off in sales, merchandising, product development, not what I'm currently doing now. But I always had a strong number sense. And pretty early on, I started getting more involved in planning and forecasting. At 32 Degrees, my role was initially sales and planning. We didn't have a website. We had a wholesale fulfillment. So I started getting more involved in that. That kind of dipped my toes into operations. I also went and got an MBA and majoring in operations. So, then when our D2C website started to take off, I kind of shifted strategies to running that, running the whole gamut of buying, planning, like you said, forecasting, marketing, the whole team. My whole job has been to kind of grow the business and the team along with it.
Incredibly well suited to do what you do today. One of the main focus areas for our discussion today will be the importance of forecasting, really to achieve a successful fulfillment operation. It's a topic that doesn't get the attention it deserves. And I do want to say of the 200 odd customers that we have, nobody does forecasting better than you in 32 Degrees. I had to get that in because it's an absolute, so critical for us.
Thank you.
And what you do stands out. So tell us a little bit about that process, if you will.
And I think, I'll start with saying something that I'm going to be saying probably throughout this podcast. It really depends on, what your business model is and what makes sense for your business. For us, we're heavily based on high volume, low price. So, we're very much more a numbers before creative kind of business. And we've been that way from our wholesale side down to our D2C side. So because of that, my background of buying, planning, merchandising, forecasting operations, it's rarer for kind of a startup to have that person in charge. Usually it's a creative person in charge or more of the founder. So I've kind of really taken that background and applied it to all aspects of what we do on our website. So, compared to like traditional brick and mortar, e-commerce, they tend to treat marketing like it's a service where, as long as you have the ROI, you can keep doing more and more business and keep throwing more and more orders at the fulfillment center without really thinking about what that means operationally. It's much easier to double your marketing spend and your traffic than to double your fulfillment at a warehouse. So, we've gone through a lot of those challenges ourselves. A good example is, we used to have a marketing channel that would bring in an extra 1,000 orders if it took off and did well, and it was very unpredictable. Back a long time ago, we did about 1,000 orders a day. So doubling it randomly was very rough. And this is even back in our first year with you guys. It's hard to plan when you're randomly going to double your order volume. So, one thing we did is just try and stay on top of it, having more communication. But realistically, there's just kind of no way around that with forecasting sometimes. Some forecasting is only as good as what you put into it and what you have knowledge of. So, the difference is like now, we have those same things happen, except now our order volume has grown 10x with you. So it no longer has the same impact. So I'd say like in the beginning, a lot of it has to do with just trying to honestly just stay ahead of it. Don't get underwater, just kind of deal with the consequences. But it's really been the last few years as our order volume has increased and we've gotten a better handle on all of our forecasting across the board, whether it's from marketing channels, whether it's for, things like conversion, traffic, it's really helped us then give you a better order volume understanding of what to expect from us.
And as you bring both of those functions together under you is probably one of the strengths in your ability to bring those two elements together. Because at Amware, we see that as a disconnect in many of our customers. Marketing is very, very disconnected from the operations people. I don't say that that's a design. It's probably more of an outcome. But worse than that, they're always not in lockstep. So for us, it makes it that much tougher when we get a very, very short notice. Oh, by the way, we were all just told that there's going to be a promo in 3 days, and it's going to be 5x your normal your normal order volume. So you guys got to get prepared for that. Or we see something that, we're going to do something at the end of the month. We're not quite sure what it is or how big it's going to be. Can you just give us a little bit of insight on what your thinking is when you're dealing with Amware and you're tuning up your promotions, and what are the internal things that you look at and you do, and then your communication method, if you would.
I mean, so there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at it. So, one way is if I wanted to, I could give you an order forecast and move heaven and earth to make sure that order forecast is exactly what you received, regardless of what I'm selling products at, what marketing channels I'm running, but for us, like, obviously that's not a practical solution. So there's always these uncontrollable aspects about, things doing better than expected, things doing worse than expected. So it really comes down to just being really on top of it and keeping it simple and updating it constantly. We're constantly updating our forecast every single day. Your team might not see it every day, but anytime it comes without a certain threshold, we say, all right, well, let's change the forecast for the current week. All right, what about the following week? And then we look at macro trends like, all right, but what about the next month? What about the next 3 months? What about the next 3 years? Because as a business is growing, it's always hard to balance that short-term change in demand versus long-term growth. We're also a very seasonal business. You guys have experienced that. Before we worked with you guys, we would have insane increases where our peak week would be almost 20x our average week. So that was just an impossible amount to increase. But even with you, originally it was 8x times increases, then it's gone to 6 and it's gone to 4. As we've grown, it's really just become more easy to manage the demand because it's become a little more sustainable, a little more smoothed out. So I think that's a challenge every kind of startup has. As you're starting up, it's just so impossible to forecast what's going to even happen tomorrow sometimes. So a lot of it's just about communication, and then just honestly just sometimes letting the realities of operations dictate what we do. Wow, we've done way more business than we expected. We're really underwater. Let's pull back a little bit on some of the marketing spend. Let's just not throw good money after bad if we're not going to be able to ship it on time. It's just accepting the reality sometimes that sometimes things can be too good when it comes to operations.
We and again, thank you for the outstanding job that you do. When we struggle with some of our accounts, and even some of our larger accounts have a challenge on the forecasting side of the business, we at least to somewhat manage it, look back historically and probably spend more time on historical data with many of our customers. What did they do this time last year? What did they do? What did they do over the last 3 months? We'll always sanity check anything that we get from the customer based on past history and why would it be different. So if we do see a difference, we'll approach the customer and we'll say, hey, we haven't seen this in a while. We haven't seen this last year. Is there something you're doing different that we should be aware of in preparing for the forecast? So that's how some of what we deal with, to fill in the blanks, to fill in the voids for those customers that just, we're really not sure what we're going to do. We have no clue. We're going by what we think marketing tells us to do. So again, for us, it's about a sanity check. Let me ask you this. I'm aware that some years back, you learned the hard way with a large volume spike that took your fulfillment operator by surprise. Would you mind sharing that story for our listeners?
Yeah, this is the situation that made us move to Amware. So initially, we're a 100-year-old family-run company. Everything's been very much internal. So, we started off as a wholesaler. We were using the same operations of the other divisions. Then 32 Degrees got bigger. Oh, we got our own wholesale fulfillment centers. Then we started to do D2C. Oh, well, let's use our existing wholesale fulfillment centers to do D2C. They can do 100,000 unit pick and pack for Macy's a week. They could totally handle our, 20,000 picks a week at the time for our D2C business. But, it's just understanding that, it's not the same kind of business when you're doing smaller number of SKUs. Wholesale and D2C e-commerce are so entirely different fulfillment wise. So we were working with them and, they were able to kind of get through it. It wasn't very efficient. And then there was zero slack. They were essentially 100% utilized, working, almost 24/7. And then we had Q4 where our volume increased 17x. And then just completely put them underwater, where we were behind 3 to 4 weeks for fulfillment, which is just like a ridiculously unacceptable amount of time. I was in the warehouse every day. We were trying to bring in extra people. We were just trying to brute force it, because at a certain point, once you get too behind, it's really hard to dig yourself out, and more orders just keep piling on top and piling on top. So, that was probably one of the worst things I've dealt with in the 10-year history of working at 32 degrees. And, we've grown. I've been here since the beginning on the wholesale side too, and I've dealt with my challenges of wholesale operational issues, whether it's supply chain, whether it's, fulfillment on that side. And like, it was really the worst experience we ever had. And it really made me realize we need to separate apart from this whole wholesale operations team. And I stopped utilizing any of our wholesale operations staff internally, stopped using their warehouses, stopped using any facilities they had, and just kind of built my own team and started working with Amware from that point forward.
You mentioned that catching up is a near impossibility when you fall behind. You're absolutely correct. The reason you fell behind was because you couldn't keep up with volumes, and the only way to get ahead or catch up is to do X plus. You've got to do more volume than you weren't able to do in the first place, and that's why forecasting accurately is critical. Preparing for it is critical, and staying current is critical. You mentioned something before about fine-tuning during the day that we probably don't see. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that you do. And I would imagine it's super critical during a promotion, a forecast that you have. Hey, we're going to do 10,000 orders a day. And let's say you suddenly see it's not coming in at 10,000, it's coming in at 14,000 a day, which is, I'd like to say it's a nice problem to have, but it is a problem, right? And how do you deal with that?
So, I mean, the first thing is that, like, what in e-commerce, what does a day even mean? It's a 24-hour period that starts midnight Eastern time. It's a 24-hour business, and orders are coming through constantly from different time zones, based on different marketing channels. People are going on websites throughout the day. So my first thing would be, all right, well, is tomorrow going to be 14, or is it going to be 10, or is it going to be 6? And all right, my 2-day average is actually what I wanted, and I just got the timing of it wrong. That's usually, sometimes that can happen, but oftentimes if it's not that, it's like, all right, well, what am I actually doing that caused this? Is it something I was expecting that just did better, or was it something completely unexpected? And then it's trying to figure out, sometimes they are one-time events. A lot of it has to do with going into, getting outside of fulfillment, going into Google Analytics, looking at the traffic, and that's a big thing that, like, we do here. Is my head of e-com, who runs all of the marketing, he's very analytical too. And me and him together, we look at all the numbers, we tie together where everything comes from. Well, this is our traffic by channel, this is our conversion by channel, that's the number of orders. It is kind of that simple. It's just not simple to forecast them correctly necessarily, but there's channels that are more predictable, and there's channels that are predictable based on how much funding you put into them. So, we send 2 emails a day, we're going to get more orders than if we send 1 email. If we double the funding for some Facebook ads, we're going to get more orders than if we didn't. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's always trying to find that, like, where that drop off is, and kind of just make sure that the marketing is feeding into the orders correctly. And there's times where it's like, all right, well, yeah, we got 14,000 orders, but that cost me a bit more in ad spend than maybe I want. So let's just slow down a bit to give us time to catch up, because it's not like we're giving away the best possible sales that we could have had.
I deal with at Amware, we deal with many fast growing online businesses, and they say we're always stressing forecasting, and it's like, Harry, I want to do a better job at forecasting. What advice would you give me? And my advice would be, call Charles Lunden. But I'm not sure that that's the right advice to give every customer, although they would all benefit from it. So rather than tell 50 customers or 500 customers, we individually, I'm going to give you the opportunity now to kind of, what advice would you give to these fast growing online businesses to do a better job in forecasting?
Well, I'd say maybe we can talk offline in the future, maybe go to my consultancy, which doesn't exist yet, but one day that's the future. I mean, I guess I would say, what kind of forecast are you creating and giving to your 3PL? I'd say most people, especially in startups, they probably under forecast the sales for their boss and over forecast the orders for their fulfillment center. And there's like a misalignment of, you'd rather the warehouse be prepared for the worst case, highest scenario, but you want your boss to, under promise, over deliver. So, but in reality, you should be giving both of them the exact correct number. So I think it starts off with just the communication of, well, what actually forecasts are you giving them? There's no forecasts are never perfect. There's always an aggressive scenario. There's always a conservative scenario. There's the most likely scenario. So, how do you communicate that? And, how much impact is it, on your side with fulfillment? Yes, having 50% more orders can be a bad thing, but also having 50% less orders can be a bad thing, for staffing and for optimization and for utilization. So, it comes down to being like a partnership and a communication about where is this order coming from, and like how are you actually approaching your forecasting method? Are you trying to be realistic, honest, or are you trying just to cover yourself and make sure that everyone just has CTA?
It is probably the biggest frustration for customers and for us internally, not getting it right. I feel like I'm the caterer, and I'm catering a wedding, and they think 200 people show up, and I have 200 meals and 100 shows up. That's an issue. Or worse yet, all the relatives that they never heard of for years show up and now there's 300 people there. So that's why it's so critical for us, because we want to do a good job. Falling short creates an issue. Having too many people creates a different issue. It creates an expense issue for someone. You generally have a bias towards simplicity, and there's a lot of software out there that people, they can sell customers. Hey, here's forecasting software. You tell us about the pros and cons of a simpler forecasting model that maybe you use versus the forecasting software that's out there.
I mean, I think it really depends on what kind of business you have. So for us, I think for most businesses, if most people who are doing forecasting and doing analytics, if they could do their whole job in Excel forever and never have any limitations, they probably would. Obviously, the bigger your team gets and the more layers of management, the people who are not doing the work like the tools, because they give you better reporting, they give you better insights. But the helpful point is that I'm both of those people. So I've been able to kind of get away with doing everything internally, doing everything kind of small scale. So I mean, what it has to say is that for us, I found the simple approach makes it easier to understand why your forecasts were correct or not correct. The move going forward is towards AI and towards like algorithm-driven results, but then you kind of have a black box where you're not sure necessarily why it's spitting something out. You're not able to kind of put in those kind of more subtle, soft knowledges that would impact the forecast more than just historical data. It's only as good as the data you put in. If you could put in a perfect amount of data with every single aspect, then you probably would get a good result from software. I've just found many softwares don't do that. They kind of do their own thing. They have their own approach. And, I actually went through the whole process with a planning tool. It was more for product planning, but, from the product planning and selling, that would give us the order volume forecasts. When I actually onboarded it, I went through with it, and it just didn't do the things I needed to do in a way that I could understand and, approach and make smart decisions on. So after going through the whole process of onboarding and paying them, I abandoned it and went back and did a new approach, taking all the things I wish their system did and building it myself, in my own kind of models, which again is not always available for everybody. In a perfect world, I would have just had them make a custom software from scratch, exactly doing what I needed. But that's cost prohibitive, especially for kind of a lot of entry level brands. But also, who's to say that what I want to do now is the same as what I want to do a year from now? And you kind of get this legacy system problem that I think a lot of companies that run on technology have, that you're using a system because at the time that's what everyone thought it was. Whether you first of all, you have to get those requirements right, that all right, this is definitely what I needed, and it definitely does what I want day one. And how many people have that luxury of actually having the system do what they want day one 100% correctly? But then businesses change, environments change, and then all of a sudden the system you have doesn't do half the things you want anymore, and then everybody's putting on band-aids and adding extra layers on top of it to make it work. So so my approach has always been to try to keep it as simple as possible for as long as you can get away with, but understanding that there is a level where you just can't. There's a level where it just gets to be too big, where you can't keep it simple. But you're probably going to find at that time you have this great complicated system now, and all the people actually using it are just exporting it into Excel and doing simple things with it. So you kind of come full circle now, and you spent however much money on that software.
I know on the warehousing side, I remember when we built the system for you, and we thought, okay, this thing is going to rock and roll now for years and years. And we know Charles is saying he's going to grow, but everybody says they're going to grow 3x, 4x, and not many people hit that. And so I think, at least on the warehousing side, our philosophy over the last few years with you is we have to keep relooking the system every quarter. And I know that this year, for this year's full push, we're adding robotics to augment the system, because we've got a couple thousand SKUs. We've got some that are in the highly automated area. We've got some that are not. And for us now to really coordinate that, we've decided to go to robotics. So it's been a great ride over the last few years. And we can write a case study, obviously, on the 3PL side of how you hang on to someone who's growing exponentially, like 32 Degrees has been growing.
Yeah, I mean,
And
we've actually grown 10x with you since we joined.
yeah, I
This
know
year's going to be.
it's been in increments. It's been 10x. You said it, and you hit your forecast virtually every year. I mean, we were astounded by it. I think the first time you gave us the forecast, we looked at each other and we thought, well, maybe they're optimistic. We hear that all the time. And then we had a tiger by the tail. You guys did exactly what you said you were going to do, and you've done that over the years. 10x. First off, kudos and compliments for that. It's been an unbelievable ride. Well, so having said that, you've grown, and I would say not only 10x, but you've grown that rapidly. How about talking about that growth journey and some of the fulfillment challenges it's actually created?
Sure. So, I mean, the hardest part of our entire growth has been keeping up with fulfillment. Every other aspect of what we do, we have other challenges in our supply chain, and that we have very, very long lead times. So, the inventory I have is the inventory I have. So, I can only sell what I can sell. I can't get more quickly. So, in some ways, constraints can be a blessing, where it's like, all right, well, I have to sell these 10,000 pieces of this item one way or another, and it's just about what time and what price. But with fulfillment, the fulfillment aspect is just so much more complicated, because how do you predict customer demand, and how do you really understand what they're going to want when they're going to want it? It's like, and we do a lot of cold weather products, so we're apparel is a very seasonal business. Cold weather is even more seasonal, and it really has to do with like what's the temperature in November and December versus what's the temperature in January and February. And I always say, like, I've joked, 'cause I've done cold weather even before working here. I've done it for almost 15 years. And if I really could tell you what the temperature was, I'd be in like soybean futures. I wouldn't be selling jackets. I'd be on Wall Street making a ton of money, predicting the weather, and just be a millionaire at this point. But so it's kind of like, that's kind of the hard challenge. It's like, how do you understand all these macro level things happening in the economy with the customer? And then at the individual level, well, they like this color and I ran out of this color. It happens, and that does affect demand. We have the problem now where we have a few strong items that bring in a lot of sales. And if those items run out, we didn't buy enough, sales drop. What's happening to us right now. And then when we get new items in that they like, they'll buy more. So it really is the challenge of just understanding the macro and the micro, because they kind of come together, and you can get one right, but you're never going to get both of them right. And it's also, it comes down to, it's hard enough to tell you what's going to happen this week or next week. And then I tell you at the end of the year. And then it's like, oh yeah, 3 years from now, this is going to be our volume. And we all know that number is completely BS, but we're all taking a guess, and we have to make some long-term decisions based on a 3-year forecast. And it's like, well, be a recession in 2 years. There's all these big macro level things that just are impossible to forecast, but sometimes you have to do your best and just kind of constantly update. That's my number one takeaway, is that don't just stick with the forecast, and just update it constantly. If I'm updating this season, I should update next year and the year after that. I shouldn't just let it be a static document that never changes.
So I think you may have answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because you might want to expand on it. Your role extends well beyond order fulfillment operations. So what lessons have you learned about e-commerce in general that might help out our listeners?
So I think a lot of it is a lot of the same lessons, where, everything I'm saying here is 100% true for our customer service volume. How many calls are we getting? How many emails are we getting? It's understanding that forecasting too. It's about buying the right products, getting the right margin. How do you spend your marketing? So it's the same approach of, you have to find what makes your business unique, because everyone hopefully has something that makes their business slightly unique, because you can't reinvent the wheel with everything. So, you can kind of take the normal practice, normal knowledge for certain areas, but you have to find out what are the things that are different that makes your aspects different. For example, we're a cold weather business. We have a much bigger Q4 than most people would ever appreciate or understand. So it's just kind of hammering home that, like, this is the thing that makes us unique. This is why the conventional wisdom is not true. And that kind of applies to everything you do. And it's finding the partner who can not just understand that, but also reinforce that. The partners you find are never going to understand your business better than you, but you want them to understand their business, and you want to make sure the parts of the business they're good at are very important for what your business is good for. I'm not looking for a bespoke, we're going to hand wrap every single product. We're going to make sure 100% of the products are perfectly, beautiful. We're about volume, and we're about, efficiency. So, that's why the automation totally makes sense for us, and why we have totally different methods than probably a different warehouse and a different brand would have. So it's really the alignment of your priorities with your partner's priorities across the board. That could be in finding factories, fulfillment centers, e-commerce call centers, any other kind of things that you would be outsourcing, or even people you'd be hiring internally too.
So your career has spanned quite a bit of activity, a tremendous amount of activity, probably more than most will incur, unless they're extremely fortunate. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give a young Charles Lunden?
Oh, that's a tough one because I know whatever advice I'd give me, I wouldn't be able to honestly appreciate it probably. I think guys, maybe it's going to sound like such a cliche thing, but like kind of follow your own gut on what you think. Don't let people who say they're experts tell you that they know better than you if you think that you know better, because at the end of the day, you're the only one looking out for your business. All the partners, at the end of the day, they're a separate business. They want you to do well, but you really have to take at face value anything you're told by anybody in this business. That's kind of been my takeaway. That took me several years of learning those lessons the hard way, where I tell people, this is what we do. Yes, this is how we do it. And they're like, I'm like, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. You're not going to believe me, but this is what we do. And they're like, yeah, I understand. And then it happens and we have a big mess and they didn't understand. So I've had to learn just how to take the responsibility on my own to make sure the partners really are doing it correctly.
So interesting. I want to hone in on that, because I think you said go with what, I don't remember if you said your instinct, your gut, might not have been neither, but I know you to be a data-driven guy. I don't think you work on instinct per se. I don't think anybody knows their numbers as well as you do, at least from many of my customers. You certainly are at the top of people who can command all the data about their organization, their product, and what they do. Is that a fair statement?
I mean, so yes, but data, like that's the one difference is to me, data is not the end in itself. It's a means to an end, which is an informed decision. And sometimes I can look at all this data and it can be telling me overwhelmingly a certain result, but I know that I think there's something in this data that's missing that I'm just never going to capture. And it's actually going to be this other thing. And if the data could tell you everything, that we'd be AI driven, everything would just be models. And there's certain businesses where, if I was selling cat food, if I was selling paper towels, if I was in grocery, there's certain businesses where the data is like everything. But, I'm an apparel brand. I do cold weather product. It's very promotional. It's very seasonal. Depending on the business model you have, sometimes the data is not as important as it has to be. To me, the data is just one more thing that I focus on to then make a gut level decision with all the information I have at its disposal to me.
Okay, that's interesting. What advice would you give to up and coming operations professionals on building a successful career? Obviously not in apparel, let's say, but in just in fulfillment operations.
I mean, I think if you're just focusing on fulfillment operations, then it really is very much a numbers driven game. It can be much more focused on the numbers. I mean, operations by its definition is very operational. There's less marketing, there's less kind of design aspects to it. And it's also very much I say this a lot in the business units that I have here. I have my proactive units and my reactive units. The proactive units go out and create things from nothing. And if they did nothing, nothing would happen. The reactive units, well, the thing comes to them and they have to deal with it. A lot of our times, like our salespeople are the proactive and the production people are the reactive. And here it's like my marketing people are the proactive and the operations and the warehouse are the reactive. And if I didn't bring in any orders, there'd be nothing to do. So it's a lot of it's about just trying to understand how those things are coming to you and then just honestly dealing with it. You're trying to look for efficiencies. You're looking for ways to improve. You're looking for cost cutting, but our warehouse is never going to create the orders for us. They're never going to generate the revenue. So, it's kind of finding the balance between the things that are creating the value and the things that are working with those values to get it completed for the customer.
Interesting perspective. I agree with you as far as the operations and fulfillment side of the business. It's all data driven. It is really all about the numbers. If I call my team in and ask them, for what their opinion is, they'll all have one. And then I'll ask them what it's based on. And the example that I use is in my first warehouse operation, which wasn't going well. It was my first job, and I transitioned out of regional trucking, and I went into the warehousing side of the business, and the place wasn't operating well, and we didn't measure anything. And so we had 10 people that were doing order pickers, and I had asked the supervision in the building, I said, we're going to start to measure that activity. We're going to see what people do. take the 10 people I want as an exercise and tell me where they're going to come out, who is going to be the top picker, and rank them. And I would tell you that I had 5 supervisors participate in that exercise, and 5 people got it amazingly wrong. It was interesting. The individual that because I never forgot the story. The individual that wound up being the best picker over a 1-month period when we started the measurement process, every supervisor had this individual downgraded to the bottom. And when I asked them why, it's, well, when you watch him walk to the time clock and take a break, or you watch him coming out of the lunchroom, he was slow. He wasn't the fastest. He didn't appear to be the most energetic, but he was the most industrious. He was nonstop working. And again, to a man or a woman, they got that wrong. And I think I was fortunate that occurred to me very early on in my career, because it just reinforced for me the importance in our line of work of measuring everything, when orders come in, how they flow, and it's served me well. Charles,
there's actually I got one more thing I was thinking about that, like how it relates to operations, is that while operations is very data driven, it can't be very good at forecasting a future that's unknown. Like if something's changing and you don't know, you can only go off the history of what you have. And like a good example, which is where I'm playing around with this more with your team, is, what SKUs are bought together, and you could do an analysis based on, I have 3 weeks of history and these 2 items are bought together. But there is like a level of where, well, this is a top in black small, and then here's the matching bottom in black small. I don't need to do an analysis and wait. I could just tell you these 2 SKUs are going to be bought together because they just make sense from a more soft side of the forecasting, not from the hard numbers that you have to wait 3 or 4 weeks to get those hard numbers. So I think that's kind of the part of the forecasting too that's really important to me, is getting ahead of what the data says, because the data can only tell you so much. And especially in a very promotional seasonal Q4 business, if you're planning something 3 weeks before Q4, 3 weeks before Black Friday, you can't wait till after Black Friday to know what was going to happen that week, because that week is so crucial that you kind of only get one shot to get it right, and you have to do it ahead of time.
So anecdotally, I've got a story now that talks to forecasting, that talks to falling behind. Was 2005. It was a 3PL located in the Northeast. It was my first promotion to a COO role in the company. We onboarded a new customer. It actually happened to be a Fortune 100 customer, and there was a misprint in the RFP in that the volumes that they said were monthly were actually weekly, which meant that we were getting 4 times more volume than we had planned for. Let's say through no one's fault of their own. However, having said that, we had fallen well far behind, and 3 weeks into the startup, we had an all hands call with the customer. And the customer had said, okay, I need a plan. When are you guys, we had a lot of back and forth. The call went on for maybe a half hour. And at some point later in the call, it was actually, okay, guys, when are we going to get current? And I kind of took a step back because I inherited this team and I wanted to see how the team would work under a little bit of adversity. And they looked at each other, and the call was actually on a Monday, and they said, we'll be current by close of business Friday. And the customer said, okay, glad to hear that. The call ended and everybody just sat there. And I said, how did we get to the end of day Friday to be current? And there was silence in the room. And I said, okay, that was pretty much to buy us some time, right? And they said, yeah, that was to buy us time. They had no, going into the call, they didn't have the numbers they should have had. They didn't have the data. They weren't able to put together a glide path. Needless to say, when we sat down and we did the numbers, in order to get current, we would have to do 4 times the output that we were currently doing, which there was no way we were going to do that. And there was no way we were going to do that in a short amount. So after some looking at data, figuring out the right way to do things, we had a very, very tough love call with the customer the following morning. So I just want to echo what you said about the data in operations. And you're right, you don't know what you're going to look at in the future. But if you at least know what your capabilities are, what your capacities are, you can handle anything. You can react to anything, at least in a semi-intelligent way, and get on top of things in short order.
I agree with that.
So, Charles, where can people go online to find out more about you in 32 Degrees?
You can go to 32degrees.com and you can sign up for our mailing list. We'll give you kind of exclusive promotions and access to our weekly sales.
Charles, I mean, a lot of great information here, a lot of great insight. I hope our listeners were taking notes. The nice thing about a recording is they can re-listen to it, but I think there's a lot of gems in here that will help a lot of fast-growing companies. So that does it for another episode of Unboxing Fulfillment, the Modern B2C Fulfillment Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.